There's just no more room to dance around here. The evidence is undeniable that climate change threatens our economy. In a speech last month, Federal Reserve Governor Lael Brainerd said that climate change, quote, is already imposing substantial economic costs and is projected to have a profound effect on the economy at home and abroad. So, Mr. Gelsinis, how about if you connect the dots for us here? How does climate change put our financial system at risk?
Yes, thank you for the question, Senator. So the physical effects of climate change could devalue a range of real assets and financial assets, including commercial and residential real estate, corporate bonds and loans in certain sectors and geographies, municipal debt, commodities, and the derivatives tied to those instruments. Then in addition, the inevitable low carbon transition could severely impair the value of financial instruments tied to carbon intensive sectors. And both of these types of risks have not only micro-prudential implications for individual institutions, but also pose a broader systemic threat just given the magnitude of the risk, the types of firms exposed, and the potential speed with which these losses could materialize.
Right. Thank you. These risks are real and they affect the safety and the soundness of our financial system. The Federal Reserve currently supervises some of the country's largest banks, including the banks that have been designated as too big to fail. So, Mr. Gelsinis, if the health of one or more of these banks was at risk due to climate change, would the Federal Reserve be stepping outside its mandate or expanding its mission if it treated climate change the same way it treats other risks to the financial system?
Absolutely not, Senator. It's squarely within their mandate.
Good. In other words, because the Fed's mandate includes the safety and soundness of the too big to fail banks, it is within the Fed's responsibility to deal with climate risk. And by ignoring climate risk, the Fed and other banking agencies are allowing politics rather than science to determine the course of their action. Is that a fair statement, Mr. Gelsinis?
Yes, I mean, ignoring these risks would violate the very responsibilities Congress handed down to the regulators.
And the biggest banks seem to realize what's happening. So they've started to brag about how great they've been doing to solve this problem all on their own. Last month, for example, JP Morgan committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Now, I appreciate that commitment. I do. But we also know that JP Morgan has financed close to $270 billion in fossil fuel projects since 2016 and has yet to announce any clear steps as to how it will wind down its significant participation in oil and gas drilling, in fracking, and in other contributions to climate change. So let me ask, Mr. Gelsinis, is voluntary self-regulation from big banks sufficient to protect our financial system from climate risks?
So, Senator, when you were warning about a potential housing crash in the early 2000s, financial regulators and Wall Street executives at the time hailed the merits of self-regulation and cast aside the warnings of, quote, alarmists, since bank risk models and decision-making was so advanced that crises, really were a thing of the past. Then the predictable catastrophe struck, and it wasn't those banks that caused the crash or regulators who were asleep at the wheel who suffered the consequences. It was communities across the country and the government that picked up the tab. So financial firms simply don't have the incentive to self-insure against these risks, particularly against the worst outcomes, partly because of their near-term focus on quarterly profits, and partly because they don't bear the full costs of the risks that their activities are placing on the system. So I guess my fear is that, similar to 2008, while the music is playing, financial firms will get up and dance. While they can still make short-term profits, they'll continue to over-engage in climate risky activities until catastrophe strikes yet again, and we relearn the painful lesson of self-regulation. So anyway, that's just why I think it's so vital for financial regulators to step in here and ensure the financial system is resilient.
Right. And it is a powerful reminder of this analogy. We need to take seriously the threat that climate change presents to our financial system. And that means using our regulatory tools to mitigate that threat. And every day that the Fed and other regulators refuse to do their jobs and ignore these risks, they put both our planet and our economy at risk.